Son of a millionaire goes under the table to escape a boring dinner. He comes face to face with a woman crasher, and what she does next leaves him shocked. Hello and welcome to 80s Love Stories, where I, your favorite narrator, Christopher, bring you an exciting love story straight from the unforgettable 1980s. Get ready for a journey full of nostalgia and incredible twists. Today's story is truly remarkable, with an ending that's sure to touch your heart and leave you amazed. So, stay with me until the very last moment. I hope this experience is unforgettable for you, and may God bless you and your family. Now, let's get started. In the opulent dining room of the Blackwood Mansion, 1985, 16-year-old Frederick couldn't bear another minute of his father's business dinner. The crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting dancing shadows across the mahogany table where Maxwell Blackwood, renowned real estate tycoon, entertained his usual crowd of stuffy businessmen and their equally stuffy wives. Frederick tugged at his bow tie, feeling suffocated by more than just the formal attire. His mother, Patricia, shot him a warning glance from across the table. Her usual behave yourself look that he'd grown far too familiar with over the years. The droning voices discussing real estate markets and stock portfolios made his head spin. And that's when I told them, "You can't develop in Manhattan without—" His father's voice boomed across the table. Frederick slumped in his chair, pushing his untouched veal around the fine china plate. The conversations swirled around him like a thick fog. Mergers, acquisitions, property values, words that meant nothing to a teenager more interested in his Walkman and rock music than becoming his father's heir apparent. "Sit up straight, dear," his mother whispered when the server passed by with more wine. But Frederick had reached his limit. Under the pretense of retrieving his dropped napkin, he slid down and disappeared beneath the enormous dining table. The tablecloth hung low enough to create a private sanctuary. From underneath, he could see the adult's feet, Italian leather shoes and designer heels tapping against the hardwood floor. Here, the conversations were muffled, and he could finally breathe. That's when he saw her. In the dim light filtering through the tablecloth, he made out the figure of a young woman, perhaps a year or two older than him, crouched at the other end of the table. She wore sneakers and jeans, definitely not a dinner guest. Their eyes met, and she pressed a finger to her lips, signaling him to stay quiet. Frederick's heart raced. Who was she? How had she gotten in? Security at the Blackwood Mansion was supposedly impenetrable. The girl's presence made no sense, yet there she was giving him a conspiratorial wink. She began to crawl toward him, moving silently between the forest of legs above. Frederick remained frozen, torn between calling out and maintaining her requested silence. The strange girl stopped directly in front of him, pulled something from her jacket pocket, and pressed it into his hand. It was a piece of paper, folded multiple times. Before he could unfold it, she put her hand over his, shaking her head. Then, as quietly as she had appeared, she began moving backward, toward the other end of the table. Just then, his father's booming laugh shook the table above them. "The market is prime for expansion. We'll be breaking ground next month." Frederick watched as the mysterious girl disappeared behind the tablecloth at the far end. His heart pounding, he clutched the paper in his hand, knowing that this dinner party had just become anything but boring. Above him, the adults continued their mundane conversations, completely unaware of the intrigue unfolding beneath their feet. Frederick waited a few more moments, then clutched the paper tightly and emerged from under the table, his mind racing with questions about the mysterious girl and her secret message. "Frederick, darling, what were you doing down there?" his mother asked, her voice tinged with embarrassment. "Just retrieving my napkin, mother," he replied, slipping the folded paper into his pocket. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up his fork, trying to act normal while his mind spun with possibilities. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. Frederick barely heard the conversations around him, his thoughts consumed by the girl under the table and the mysterious paper burning a hole in his pocket. Who was she? What did the note say? And most importantly, why him? Frederick couldn't escape to his room fast enough after dinner. He raced up the mansion's grand staircase, taking the steps two at a time, his patent leather shoes clicking against the marble. The note felt like it was burning through his pocket, and his mind raced with possibilities about its contents. His bedroom was a teenager's haven in 1985, walls covered with posters of The Clash and Duran Duran, a turntable in the corner surrounded by vinyl records, and his prized possession, a brand new Nintendo Entertainment System his father had imported from Japan before its US release. But tonight, none of that interested him. Locking his door, Frederick pulled out the crumpled paper with trembling hands. The note was written in neat, precise handwriting. "Your father isn't who you think he is. Neither is your house. Look behind the painting in the library, the one of the ships at sea. Come alone tomorrow at 3 p.m. I'll be waiting. V." Frederick sat heavily on his bed, reading the note 3 more times. The painting she mentioned, he knew it well. It hung in the library's east wall, an enormous seascape that had been there for as long as he could remember. He'd spent countless hours in that library, avoiding his father's business associates, but he'd never noticed anything unusual about the painting. A knock at his door made him jump. "Freddie, are you decent?" His mother's voice carried through the heavy oak door. Quickly stuffing the note under his pillow, Frederick called out, "Yes, Mother, come in." Patricia Blackwood entered, elegant as always in her evening wear, pearls gleaming at her throat. "Darling, what's gotten into you tonight? You barely touched your dinner, and that business under the table." She perched on the edge of his bed, concern evident in her features. "I'm fine, Mother. Just bored. You know how father's dinner parties are." His mother's face softened. "I know they're not exactly thrilling for a 16-year-old, but they're important. Your father wants you to learn the business, meet the right people." Frederick nodded absently, his mind still on the mysterious girl and her note. His mother continued talking about responsibility and family legacy, but he barely heard her. Instead, he was thinking about the girl's sneakers, red Converse high-tops, so out of place in their formal dining room, about her quick, confident movements under the table, about the way she'd looked at him like they shared a secret, even before passing him the note. "And your father suggested that perhaps you might like to intern at the office this summer," his mother finished, looking at him expectantly. "What? Oh, yes, perhaps," Frederick mumbled, having missed most of what she'd said. Patricia sighed, standing up. "Get some rest, darling. You seem distracted tonight." She kissed his forehead and left, closing the door behind her. Alone again, Frederick pulled out the note and reread it. "Your father isn't who you think he is." What did that mean? Sure, Maxwell Blackwood was stern, often distant, and obsessed with his real estate empire, but he was still just Dad, wasn't he? Unable to wait until tomorrow, Frederick decided to do some preliminary investigation. He changed out of his dinner clothes into jeans and a t-shirt, then waited until he heard his parents retire to their wing of the mansion. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 11 as he slipped out of his room. The library was 3 floors down, in the mansion's east wing. Frederick knew every creaky floorboard, every squeaky hinge, knowledge gained from years of sneaking around after bedtime. He moved silently through the darkened halls, passing beneath portraits of Blackwood ancestors who seemed to watch his progress with painted eyes. The library doors were unlocked. They always were. It was his father's pride and joy, a 2-story room filled with first editions and leather-bound volumes. Moonlight filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the Persian carpets. The seascape painting hung exactly where it always had, dominating the east wall. Frederick approached it cautiously, his heart pounding. It was a dramatic scene. Tall ships battling a storm, waves crashing against their hulls. The artist's name was barely visible in the corner. H. Turner, 1847. Standing before it now, Frederick noticed something he'd never paid attention to before. The frame seemed unusually thick for a painting of its size. He ran his fingers along the ornate wooden edge, feeling for anything unusual. A floorboard creaked behind him. Frederick spun around, his heart leaping into his throat. For a moment he thought he saw a shadow move near the library doors, but when he looked more carefully, nothing was there. Still, the sense of being watched prickled at the back of his neck. He moved away from the painting, trying to appear casual in case anyone was actually there. "Hello?" he called out softly. No response. As he headed back to his room, Frederick couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone in the mansion's dark halls. He kept looking over his shoulder, expecting to see the mysterious girl or someone else following him. By the time he reached his bedroom, his hands were shaking. Lying in bed that night, sleep eluded him. Questions tumbled through his mind. Who was the girl? What was behind the painting? And most troubling of all, what didn't he know about his father? The digital clock on his nightstand clicked over to midnight, its red numbers glowing in the darkness. 17 hours until his meeting with the mysterious V. Frederick had a feeling they would be the longest 17 hours of his life. Outside his window, a car drove past the mansion's gates, its headlights briefly illuminating his room. In that flash of light, Frederick could have sworn he saw someone standing in his garden, looking up at his window. But when he rushed to look, there was no one there, just another shadow in a night that suddenly seemed full of them. Sleep had barely come to Frederick when his alarm buzzed at 7. The morning passed in a haze of anticipation. At breakfast, he found himself studying his father with new eyes. Maxwell Blackwood sat at the head of the table, hidden behind his Wall Street Journal, occasionally barking orders into his new mobile phone, a bulky Motorola Dynatac that he considered a status symbol. "The Henderson property needs to be cleared by next week," Maxwell was saying into the phone. "I don't care about the tenants' complaints. We have permits." Was there something different in his father's voice? Some hidden meaning in his words that Frederick had never noticed before? The morning paper lowered, and Maxwell's steel-grey eyes fixed on his son. "You're staring, Frederick. Something on your mind?" "No, sir," Frederick mumbled, looking down at his untouched eggs. "Just thinking about school." Patricia breezed into the dining room, perfectly coiffed as always. "Darling, don't forget we have the Carmichaels coming for bridge this afternoon." Frederick's heart skipped. The Carmichaels meant his mother would be occupied at exactly 3 o'clock, one less thing to worry about. The hours crawled by. Frederick tried watching MTV in his room, attempted to beat Super Mario Brothers, even started his summer reading assignment, anything to make time move faster. At 2:45, he could wait no longer. The library was empty when he arrived, sunlight streaming through its tall windows. The seascape painting looked different in daylight, more mundane, less mysterious. Frederick approached it cautiously, aware of every sound in the huge room. His fingers traced the frame again, this time more thoroughly. Near the bottom right corner, he felt it, a small irregularity in the wood. Pressing it caused a barely audible click. "Careful," a voice said behind him. "The mechanism is old." Frederick spun around. There she was, the girl from under the table. In daylight, he could see her clearly, tall and athletic, with short, dark hair and intense green eyes. She wore the same red Converse, paired with ripped jeans and a Ramones t-shirt. "I'm Victoria," she said, moving closer, "but most people call me V." "How did you get in here?" Frederick asked, his voice barely a whisper. Victoria smiled mysteriously. "The same way I got in last night, through the servants' entrance. Your security isn't as good as your father thinks it is." She reached past him and pressed the spot he'd found on the frame. This time, something shifted behind the painting. "Help me move it," she instructed. Together, they carefully pulled the painting away from the wall. Behind it was a small wall safe, but that wasn't what caught Frederick's attention. Next to the safe was a narrow ledge filled with documents. Victoria pulled out a manila envelope. "Your father's been keeping secrets, Frederick. Big ones, the kind that hurt people." "What do you mean?" Frederick asked, but Victoria was already pulling papers from the envelope. "Look at these," she said, spreading several documents on a nearby table. Eviction notices, forged building permits, falsified safety reports. Your father's company isn't just developing properties, they're forcing people out of their homes, my family included. Frederick stared at the papers, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. He recognized his father's signature on several documents, along with what appeared to be clearly altered dates and details. "Now that's not possible," he said, but even as the words left his mouth, he remembered his father's phone conversation that morning about the Henderson property. "My father wouldn't he?" Victoria's voice was gentle but firm. 2 months ago, my grandmother's entire apartment building was condemned based on a falsified safety report. The building had stood for 50 years without problems, but suddenly it was structurally unsound. Everyone had to leave within a week. Most of the residents were elderly, living on fixed incomes. They had nowhere to go. Frederick's hands trembled as he examined more documents. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you might be the only person who can help stop it," Victoria said. "Your father trusts you. You have access to this house, to his office. How you could—" A sound from the hallway made them both freeze. Footsteps were approaching the library. Victoria quickly gathered the documents, shoving them back into the envelope. "Take these," she whispered, pressing the envelope into his hands. "Read them carefully. If you want to help, meet me tomorrow at the old Anderson Diner on 4th Street, 3 o'clock. She slipped away just as Frederick heard his mother's voice chatting with Mrs. Carmichael. He barely had time to push the painting back into place before they entered the library. "Oh, Frederick," his mother said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "Just looking for a book," he managed, the envelope hidden behind his back. "For school." "Well, don't let us disturb you," Patricia said, leading Mrs. Carmichael to the card tables set up for bridge. "Although you might want to fix your hair, darling." "It's standing up quite oddly." Frederick nodded and hurried from the library, the envelope tucked under his shirt. His mind was racing. The girl's words echoed in his head. "Your father's been keeping secrets." He thought about the Henderson property, about his grandmother's apartment building, about all the construction sites he'd seen with his father over the years. How many other buildings? How many other families? In his room, Frederick locked the door and spread the documents across his bed. As he read through them, his stomach twisted into knots. There was no denying the evidence. His father's signature was on everything. The same signature he'd seen on his birthday cards, his school permission slips, his summer camp applications, the signature of a man he thought he knew, a man who, it seemed, he didn't know at all. Frederick barely slept that night. The documents from behind the painting scattered across his desk. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his father's signature on those eviction notices, heard Victoria's words about her grandmother's building. The digital clock on his nightstand blinked relentlessly. 2:17, 3:42, 4:55. At breakfast, Maxwell was his usual self, reviewing contracts while sipping his coffee. "Son," he said suddenly, not looking up from his papers, "I've been thinking about your summer internship. It's time you learned the real estate business from the ground up." Frederick nearly choked on his orange juice. "The ground up?" "Yes, starting with our newest development, the Henderson property." Maxwell finally looked up, his eyes sharp. "I want you to see how we transform neighborhoods, create opportunities. It's about progress, son, the future." Frederick thought about the documents hidden in his room. What about the people who already live there? Something flickered across his father's face. So brief, Frederick almost missed it. Progress always has its costs. The greater good demands sacrifice. He checked his Rolex. "I have a meeting. We'll discuss this more later." After his father left, Frederick found himself wandering the mansion's halls, really looking at them for the first time. The marble floors, crystal chandeliers, priceless artworks. How much of it had been built on sacrifice, on families like Victoria's? The Anderson Diner was a stark contrast to his home, a typical 1950s chrome and neon establishment that had seen better days. At precisely 3 o'clock, Frederick pushed open the glass door, bell jingling above his head. Victoria sat in a corner booth, a chocolate milkshake in front of her. "Yeah, you came," she said, sliding over to make room. "I wasn't sure you would." "I read everything," Frederick said, sitting down. "Multiple times. But I still don't understand why you're showing me all this. Why not go to the authorities?" Victoria stirred her milkshake with the straw. "We tried. Your father has friends in high places, very high places. The complaints disappear, the inspectors look the other way, and the buildings come down anyway." A waitress approached. Her name tag read Betty, and Frederick ordered a Coke, more for something to do than out of thirst. "What happened to the people from your building?" he asked after Betty left. "Some found places with relatives. Others. Victoria's voice caught. My grandmother had a heart attack from the stress. She's okay, but she's living with us now in a tiny 2-bedroom apartment, 6 people crammed together, because we had nowhere else to go. Frederick's Coke arrived, and he wrapped his hands around the cold glass. I want to help, he said quietly, but I don't know how. Victoria leaned forward. Your father keeps the original documents in his office, the real permits, the actual inspection reports. If we could get those... You want me to break into my father's office? Frederick's voice rose slightly, and Victoria quickly shushed him. Not break in. You have access. You're his son. No one would question you being there. Frederick thought about the summer internship his father had mentioned that morning. Maybe not, but his office is always locked, and he has a safe behind his desk. But you know where he keeps the key, don't you? Frederick did know. He'd seen his father retrieve it countless times from inside the grandfather clock in his study. The same clock he wound every Sunday evening at precisely 8 o'clock. Even if I could get the documents, Frederick said, what then? I know people, journalists, lawyers, people who can't be bought off or scared away. With the original documents, they could stop the Henderson development, maybe even save other buildings. Frederick stared into his Coke, watching the bubbles rise to the surface. Everything Victoria said made sense. But this was his father they were talking about, the man who'd taught him to ride a bike, who'd built him a treehouse, who'd also destroyed Victoria's home and probably countless others. I need time to think, he said finally. Victoria nodded, sliding out of the booth. The Henderson demolition starts next week. We don't have much time. She pulled something from her pocket, a folded piece of paper with a phone number. If you decide to help, call this number from a payphone, not your house phone. After she left, Frederick sat in the booth for a long time, listening to the diner's jukebox play time after time by Cyndi Lauper. Betty refilled his Coke without asking, giving him a sympathetic smile as if she could sense his troubled thoughts. The sun was setting when he finally walked home, taking the long way through the neighborhood. He passed construction sites where old buildings were being torn down, new luxury condos rising in their place. Signs everywhere proclaimed Blackwood Development, building the future. The future. His father's words from breakfast echoed in his mind. Progress always has its costs. But who really paid those costs? Back home, Frederick found his mother in the garden, tending to her roses. Darling, where have you been? You missed tennis with the Whitman boy. Just walking. Thinking. Patricia stood, brushing dirt from her gardening gloves. About the internship. Your father told me he mentioned it this morning. He's so excited to have you join the business. Frederick looked at his mother, really looked at her. Did she know? About the forged documents, the displaced families, about the real cost of their comfortable life. Mum, he started, then hesitated. Did you ever wonder about Dad's business? About how he... Frederick, she cut him off, her voice suddenly sharp. Your father works very hard to provide for this family. Very hard. Some people, they don't understand progress. They resist change. But your father has vision. Something in her tone made Frederick stop. There was an edge there he'd never heard before, a defensiveness that suggested maybe she did know more than she let on. In his room that night, Frederick pulled out the phone number Victoria had given him. Such a small piece of paper to hold such weight. Outside his window, the sun had completely set, leaving him in the growing darkness with his thoughts and his choices. The next day was Sunday. Clock winding day. He had until 8 o'clock to decide. Sunday arrived with the weight of inevitability. Frederick spent the morning watching the clock, each minute bringing him closer to 8 p.m. His father was hosting a lunch meeting in the garden, another group of investors discussing the Henderson property. Through his bedroom window, Frederick could hear their laughter mixing with the clink of wine glasses. Prime location, Maxwell's voice carried up. Once we clear out the current residents... Frederick turned away from the window, unable to listen anymore. He'd barely slept, spending most of the night thinking about Victoria's grandmother, about the families in the Henderson building, about all the others he didn't know about. The phone number she'd given him felt like it was burning a hole in his pocket. At 3 o'clock, he couldn't stand it anymore. He walked to the payphone near the local drugstore, his hands shaking as he dialed the number. "Hello," Victoria's voice answered on the second ring. "It's me," Frederick said. "I'll do it. I'll help." He could hear her relief through the phone. "Are you sure? Once we start—" "I'm sure," he said more firmly than he felt. "My father winds the clock at 8. The study will be empty by 8:30. They made plans quickly, keeping the conversation brief. Victoria would wait in her car around the corner. All Frederick had to do was get the documents and get out. Simple, except for the part where he'd be betraying his father. The rest of the afternoon crawled by. Frederick picked at his dinner, unable to eat. His mother kept giving him concerned looks, but he blamed a stomachache. His father was too absorbed in a phone call about property values to notice anything was wrong. At 7:55 due, Frederick positioned himself in the library, pretending to read. Through the open door, he could see his father's study across the hall. Right on schedule, Maxwell emerged from his home office, key in hand. Frederick watched over the top of his book as his father performed his weekly ritual, opening the grandfather clock, winding it carefully, then placing the key back inside. 5 minutes later, Maxwell retired to the sitting room with Patricia for their usual Sunday evening routine. Watching Murder, she wrote, while sharing a bottle of wine. The house settled into its familiar patterns, but everything felt different to Frederick. Even the air seemed charged with possibility and danger. He waited until 8:30, counting the minutes on his watch. The study door was unlocked. His father never locked it after winding the clock. Confidence in routine, Victoria had called it. Or maybe just arrogance. The grandfather clock loomed before him, its steady ticking seeming unnaturally loud in the quiet house. Frederick's hands trembled as he opened the small door in its base. The key was there, just where it always was, hanging on a small hook. His father's office smelled of leather and expensive cigars. Frederick had been in here countless times, but never like this, never as an intruder. The safe was behind a painting. Another one, he thought, with grim humor. The key slid into the lock smoothly. Inside, he found exactly what Victoria had described, folders full of original documents, untampered and damning. He was so focused on gathering them that he didn't hear the footsteps in the hallway. "Frederick!" He froze. His mother's voice, coming from just outside the study. "Are you in your father's office?" Patricia appeared in the doorway, a glass of wine still in her hand. She took in the scene. The open safe, the documents in Frederick's hands. Her face went through a series of emotions, surprise, understanding, and then something else, something harder. "Mom," Frederick started, but she held up her hand. "Put them back," she said quietly. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." She stepped into the office, closing the door behind her. "You've met someone who's told you things about your father's business, about the buildings, the families." Frederick stared at her. "You know?" "Of course I know." Patricia set her wineglass down on Maxwell's desk. "Where do you think all this came from?" She gestured around at the office, the house beyond. "Progress isn't pretty, Frederick. It's not clean, but it's necessary. Necessary." The word tasted bitter in his mouth, like what happened to Victoria's grandmother, to her family. Something flickered in Patricia's eyes. Victoria, the girl in the red shoes. Frederick's heart stopped. "You saw her? Under the table?" "I see everything in this house, Frederick. I always have." She moved closer, her voice dropping. "Did you think you were the first person she approached, the first one she tried to use against your father?" "Use? She's telling the truth. The evidence is right here." He held up the folders. "The truth," Patricia said, almost sadly, "is that your father brings progress to dying neighborhoods. Yes, people get displaced. Yes, it's unfortunate, but in the end, everyone benefits. Property values rise, new businesses come in, the whole area improves. Everyone benefits except the people who lived there first," Frederick said. "The people who lose everything." Patricia's face hardened. "Put the documents back. Frederick, go to your room. We'll forget this happened." "And if I don't?" "Then you'll leave me no choice but to tell your father what you've done." She picked up her wineglass again. "Think carefully about your next move, darling. There's more at stake here than you understand. She left him standing there, the documents heavy in his hands, the grandfather clock ticking away in the hall, marking time, marking choices, marking the end of everything he thought he knew about his family. Through the study window, he could see Victoria's car waiting in the darkness. She was counting on him. All those families were counting on him, whether they knew it or not. But his mother's words echoed in his head. Think carefully about your next move. The safe stood open before him, waiting for his decision. Frederick stood in his father's study, the document still in his hands, his mother's words hanging in the air. Through the window, he could see Victoria's car, a battered Volkswagen Beetle that seemed out of place in this neighborhood of luxury vehicles, just like Victoria herself had seemed out of place under that dining table. His watch showed 8:45 p.m. Murder, she wrote, would be ending soon. His father would be heading to his study for his nightly cigar. Time was running out. With trembling hands, Frederick made his decision. He tucked the documents into his jacket and closed the safe, replacing the painting carefully. But as he turned to leave, he found himself face to face with his father. Maxwell Blackwood filled the doorway, his large frame casting a shadow across the study floor. Behind him stood Patricia, her face unreadable. "I had hoped," Maxwell said quietly, "that your mother was mistaken." He stepped into the study, closing the door behind him. Patricia remained outside. "Show me what you're hiding, Frederick." For a moment, Frederick considered lying. But what was the point? He pulled the documents from his jacket. "Ah," Maxwell said, taking them. "And I suppose you were planning to give these to that girl, Victoria Martinez." Frederick's surprise must have shown on his face because his father gave a thin smile. "Did you think we wouldn't investigate her? After finding her under our dining table?" Maxwell placed the documents on his desk. "The Martinez family has been troublesome, refusing to sell their building, organizing protests, spreading lies about our developments." "They're not lies," Frederick said, finding his voice. "I've seen the proof, the forged permits, the fake inspection reports." "What you've seen," Maxwell interrupted, "is business. Real estate development isn't for the faint of heart, son. Sometimes you have to push a little harder, move a little faster than the system allows. For the greater good." The greater good. Frederick felt anger rising in his chest. What about Mrs. Martinez's heart attack? What about all the families who lost their homes? Progress has its price. That's easy to say when you're not the one paying it. Maxwell's face darkened. "You think I haven't paid prices? You think this empire built itself?" He moved to the window, looking out at the perfectly manicured grounds. "When I started, I had nothing. No connections, no advantages, just ambition and the willingness to do whatever it took to succeed." He turned back to Frederick. "Everything I've done for you, to give you the life I never had, the opportunities I had to fight for." "I never asked for any of this," Frederick said. "No," Maxwell agreed. "You didn't, but you've benefited from all of it. Your schools, your clothes, your games, all paid for by the same business practices you're so quick to condemn." The truth of it hit Frederick like a physical blow. He thought about his Nintendo, imported before anyone else had one, his expensive clothes, his privileged life. He was as much a part of this system as his father. "It's not too late," Maxwell said, his voice softening. "The internship offer still stands. Learn the business from the inside. Maybe you can find better ways to do things, more gentle approaches, but you have to start somewhere." Through the window, Frederick could still see Victoria's car. She was waiting for him, waiting for documents he no longer had. Documents that might have helped her family and others like them. "What happens to the Martinez family?" he asked. "That depends," Maxwell said, "on what happens next." He gestured to the phone on his desk. "Call her. Tell her you couldn't get the documents. End this now and we can all move forward." Frederick looked at the phone, then at his father. "And if I don't?" "Then the Martinez family will learn how much harder life can become when they oppose progress." Maxwell's voice was calm, matter of fact. Their new apartment building might suddenly have code violations. Mr. Martinez might find his job situation becoming precarious. Things happen. It wasn't just a threat, it was a lesson. This was how power worked. This was how his father's world operated. Frederick's hand hovered over the phone. Through the study door, he could hear the grandfather clock ticking, marking each moment of his choice. Everything had seemed so clear this morning. Right and wrong, good and evil. Simple distinctions that now blurred before his eyes. He thought about Victoria's grandmother, about all the other families, but he also thought about Victoria herself, waiting in her car, believing in him, believing he could make a difference. The phone sat on his father's desk, waiting for his decision. In the distance, a car horn honked, once, twice. Victoria's signal that time was running out. Frederick reached for the phone. Frederick's hand closed around the phone, but he didn't pick it up. Instead, he looked directly at his father. "No," he said quietly. Maxwell's eyebrows rose. "No? I won't call her. I won't help you hurt more families." Frederick straightened his shoulders. "And I won't take the internship." "Think carefully about what you're doing, son." "I am thinking carefully. For the first time, I'm really thinking." Frederick moved away from the desk. "You said everything you did was for me, to give me opportunities. But I never wanted this kind of opportunity." Through the window, he could see Victoria getting out of her car, probably wondering why he hadn't come out. She stood under a streetlight, her red Converse bright against the dark pavement. "What do you want then?" Maxwell asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. Frederick thought about Victoria's face when she talked about her grandmother, about the families who had lost their homes. He thought about the girl who had been brave enough to crawl under a table to fight for what she believed in. "I want to do the right thing," he said, "and maybe I can't stop your developments or save everyone's homes, but I can choose not to be part of it." Maxwell's face hardened. "Then you choose to give up everything, the trust fund, the inheritance, all of it." "If that's how it has to be." Frederick walked to the study door, then paused. "You know what the strange thing is, Dad? Under that dining table the other night, hiding from another boring business dinner, that was the first time I felt like I was doing something real, something that mattered." He left his father standing in the study and walked through the quiet house, past his mother who watched silently from the sitting room, past the grandfather clock with its steady ticking. Outside, the summer night was warm and heavy with possibilities. Victoria looked up as he approached. "Did you get them?" Frederick shook his head. No, and I'm not going to." Her face fell. "But—" "Listen," he said, cutting her off. "My father knows everything. About you, about your family. If I give you those documents, he'll destroy your family completely. But I have another idea." He told her about his trust fund, about his inheritance, about his father's ultimatum. "I can't get you the documents on," he said, "but I can help in other ways. My inheritance, it's worth millions. When I turn 18 next month, I can access it. We could use that money to help the families he's displaced, set up a foundation, provide legal aid, find new homes." Victoria stared at him. "You'd give up everything, your whole future." Frederick looked back at the mansion, at the life he'd always known. "No," he said, "I think I'm finally finding my future." For the first time since he'd met her, Victoria smiled, a real smile that lit up her whole face. Standing there under the streetlight, she suddenly leaned forward and kissed him softly on the cheek. "You're nothing like your father," she said. "Thank you," Frederick replied, meaning it. They spent the rest of the evening sitting in her Volkswagen, planning how they could help the families, talking about the foundation they would build. It wouldn't stop all of Maxwell's developments, but it would give people a fighting chance, a way to land on their feet. As they talked, Frederick felt lighter than he had in years. He thought about that boring dinner party that seemed so long ago now, about crawling under the table to escape his father's world. He hadn't known it then, but he'd been crawling towards something, not just away. A month later, on his 18th birthday, Frederick signed the papers to establish the New Beginnings Foundation. His father didn't attend the ceremony, but his mother did, standing quietly in the back. When their eyes met, he saw something there he hadn't seen before, not exactly pride, but understanding. Victoria stood beside him as he gave his first speech as the foundation's director. She still wore her red Converse, but now they were paired with a professional suit. They made an odd pair, the former rich kid and the girl from under the table, but somehow it worked. The foundation's first case was the Henderson property. They couldn't stop the development entirely, but they managed to negotiate better terms for the residents, ensuring they received fair compensation and help finding new homes. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a start. Sometimes late at night, Frederick would think about that moment in his father's study, about the choice he'd made. He'd given up a fortune, but he'd found something worth more: purpose, integrity, and, unexpectedly, love. Victoria caught him lost in thought one evening as they were closing up the foundation office. "Regrets?" she asked, only half joking. Frederick looked at her, at the desk covered in case files of families they were helping, at the future they were building together. "Not one," he said, and meant it. Outside their office window, the city was changing as cities always do. Old buildings came down, new ones went up. But now, thanks to a chance encounter under a dining room table, some of those changes were for the better. Somewhere in the city, a grandfather clock still ticked, marking time, marking changes, marking new beginnings. Thank you for watching today's story. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel to relive the magic of the 80s every day with our heartfelt stories. May God bless you and your family, and don't forget to click on the video popping up on the screen right now. It's another totally rad story you won't want to miss. See you in the next video, and stay awesome.